Greetings, everyone. Well, this is one that I promised to do fairly recently and just kind of got sidetracked with other things, but it's one that I've been wanting to do for a while because I heard a lot of great things about it. I'm, of course, talking about All-Star Superman, Volume 1 of the graphic novel, which was sent to me very generously by a longtime YouTube viewer and good friend of mine, Skinslip. He's a big fan of this and was all raves about it and said, you know, even if you're not a big Superman fan, you should totally check out All-Star Superman because it's worth checking out. Well, I finally sat down and read it, and as you know, if you've been paying attention, I picked up Volume 2 a little while ago as well, so I could actually read the whole thing, and I thought, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well go the whole 9 yards and get the movie as well. So, I read the comic, just powered through it in a couple of days, and then watched the movie. What did I think of all of the above? Let's find out today on the Multimedia Chronicles. Welcome back. Well, first off, I guess we'll talk about the comic book, because that is, of course, where it all comes from. I find it interesting that this particular comic was one of the ones they decided to do an animated adaptation of, because it's not actually that old. When did this come out? Like 2006? Something like that? I think it was 2000. Yeah, 2006, 2007. So it's barely 6-7 years old, and already it's got an animated movie adaptation. That's how huge this miniseries was and how well received it was by the fans. It just caught everybody's attention and took everyone by surprise. Now, the whole idea behind the All-Star line was sort of to present what-if stories featuring some of the top-tier DC characters. That said, I think the only one that was really successful out of that experiment was All-Star Superman. All the ingredients were in place for some kick-ass stuff, but for some reason it just didn't work out. For example, if you read up on some information about All-Star Batman, first off, it was never finished. Second, they got Frank Miller to come back and do All-Star Batman. That seemed like a winning combination. I mean, Frank Miller's done some pretty awesome Batman stories in the past, but apparently in the intervening 20-30 years, Frank Miller's gone batshit insane. And his All-Star Batman is, from what I've seen, is like one of the worst written pieces of shit ever. And it's just god-awful. In fact, that's where the line, "I'm the goddamn Batman" comes from. Because it was just so stupid that it's become a meme. Now, as for All-Star Superman, we got a great creative team of Grant Morrison, who is a writer that I'm sure many comic fans are familiar with. He's written a lot of stuff over the years. Actually, speaking of Batman, one of my all-time favorite Batman stories, Arkham Asylum, was written by Grant Morrison. While I'm mentioning it, why don't I just grab it, and I'll show you the edition of Arkham Asylum that I have. I actually have the first printing of the original hardcover edition. How cool is that? Beautiful, Sandman fans take note, beautiful painted artwork by Dave McKean, who of course did all the covers for Sandman and a lot of the early covers for Hellblazer as well, and is just generally an awesome, awesome artist. And there we go. But we're not here to talk about Arkham Asylum. Maybe we'll talk about this a little more another time. Don't ask me when, I don't know. I'm just saying maybe. Anyway, so All-Star Superman, they got Grant Morrison and paired him up with Frank Quitely, who was an artist whose work I was unfamiliar with, but man, did he ever do an awesome job. Let's just take a quick look here at some of the artwork. We got, some beautiful, iconic imagery of Superman, of course. Lots of images like that, and just generally, and even when he's doing just Clark Kent and such, rushing to get to Perry's meeting before he's fired for being late. Yeah, like Perry would ever fire Clark Kent. And I got these really cool cover images. They reprinted all the covers in here as well, just basically as art pieces in between the stories. So that's pretty cool. So All-Star Superman was basically done as a 12-issue miniseries, and it is a very nicely self-contained story. I mentioned that Grant Morrison is a name that many of you would probably be familiar with. I've been familiar with his work for a while, and honestly, he's one of those writers who's very hit and miss for me. I know he's written a lot of great stuff that I've enjoyed, the aforementioned Arkham Asylum, and quite a few others. I know one of the big notable series he did was one called The Invisibles, which was part of the DC Comics Vertigo line for a while. And I don't know what it was about The Invisibles. It just didn't do it for me. Now, don't get me wrong, I gave it a fair shake. A friend of mine was collecting the graphic novel reprints, and he lent me the first 3, and I read all the way through all 3 of them. And while I was reading it, it was, it was okay. It was passable entertainment, fairly light and fun and whatnot. But shortly after closing the cover, I was just like, what did I just read? Like, honestly, it didn't feel like it was going anywhere. It just, so I got to a point where I was 3 volumes in, and it just started to seem like maybe it was going somewhere, but it just did not do it for me. I don't know what it was, but I just did not care for The Invisibles at all. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there's a lot of people out there who love it, and a lot of, Grant Morrison fanboys or whatever who just drool over anything with his name on it. But for me personally, I take things on a story-by-story basis. I don't consider myself a particular fanboy of any particular writer or artist. Frank Miller, perfect example. Love his Batman stories from the 80s. Year One, Dark Knight Returns, great stuff. But some of the recent stuff he's done, not so much. I don't know what happened, but I think he just went crazy. So, back to All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman, I should mention right off the bat, I'm not a huge Superman fan. Obviously I have as much familiarity with the character as pretty much anyone in Western civilization. I know that he's the last son of Krypton, that his parents were scientists, that his planet was doomed. He came to Earth. They sent him off in a rocket ship. He came to Earth, and the yellow sunlight gives him his superpowers here, because of course Krypton had a red sun, so they were all basically just normal there. But on Earth, under the yellow sun, for some reason, it gives him superpowers. And he's quite literally a god among men. He's just got such a wide range of superpowers. And they explore that in this, actually. They talk about, he actually does exhibit other abilities that we haven't really seen before. And it's interesting. Sorry, just a little speck of something on the lens there. So essentially, All-Star Superman, you have what is, I guess I can best describe it as a loving homage to the history of the character, while at the same time being a fitting end for the character. Now, this is not a canonical story. This does not fit into the main continuity of all the other Superman books out there. This is basically a what-if, an alternate universe, whatever you want to call it. Just sort of a standalone story that shows us some sides of Superman we might not have seen, and postulates what might happen if Superman dies, and what would the circumstances of that be. So without giving too much away, it's essentially a death of Superman story, and that's really giving nothing away because you find that out in the very first issue. Essentially, Superman saves a space mission that's out to get some essentially samples from the sun, and something goes horribly wrong. Turns out Lex Luthor has sabotaged the mission as part of a trap to lure Superman out there. And when Superman gets too close to the sun for prolonged periods, it turns out that it basically supercharges his cells. So the sun, which gives him his power, it's a case of too much of a good thing. So he literally gets super cancer, where his cells are slowly degenerating and such. They become supercharged, so he becomes super smart and super fast, and all his abilities are heightened. But it's like that line in Blade Runner: the bulb that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you burned ever so brightly, Superman. Slight paraphrasing there. So basically, he's in the process of burning up over the course of the story. So he's trying to get things done. He's trying to sort of figure out, the things that he most needs to get done before he dies. So he reconciles his relationship with Lois Lane, and we see a lot of other familiar characters showing up throughout. You get the Bizarros in there. You get some rival Supermen from Krypton, and all kinds of crazy stuff, and of course inevitably his big ultimate final showdown with Lex Luthor, and it's just an epic story that really just takes you on a journey, and it touches on all the big things that even a casual fan will recognize from the 70, 80-year history of the character. I mean, it's a huge backlog of lore, and it essentially touches on all of them, all the major beats in Superman's history that all of us are familiar with. It touches on in some way, not always in the same way that you might be familiar with them from history. It's sort of a reinterpretation of a lot of things. For example, the Parasite shows up, and I know the Parasite that I know from the old comics was basically a guy in a purple costume who could absorb the powers of other super beings. In this one, he's basically this almost, I mean, he's intelligent, but not conniving and such like the original Parasite was. He's basically just an animalistic creature that is a slave to his need to absorb power and the life energy of other beings and such. And it's quite an exciting appearance by that character. So, that's an example of reinterpretation. There's also a reinterpretation of Doomsday. So it is Doomsday. It is recognizable as Doomsday, but it's not the Doomsday, the character Doomsday from the original Death of Superman story way back in the 90s. But it's not the same Doomsday that we know. It's a reinterpretation of that concept, So as a Death of Superman story, I actually really enjoyed All-Star Superman, and I thought it was actually a much classier and, dare I say, plausible Death of Superman story than what we actually got back in the 90s, where, the 90s one basically was just him fighting Doomsday for several issues and getting the tar beat out of him until he was supposedly dead. But of course, we all know he wasn't. In this one, he's dead. There is no stopping it. He gets his super cancer, and it is inevitable that he will be dead by the end of the series. You know this. You know this going in. And it works really well. Now, that said, I was talking to Skinslip about it, and he said that apparently Grant Morrison had planned had worked out a follow-up story that would show how Superman managed to survive. However, the fan and critical reaction was so positive with it being seen as a Death of Superman story that he felt it would be doing a disservice to the fans to retcon that with his continuation. And as such, the story of All-Star Superman has drawn to a close. Now, on to the movie. What did I think of the movie? Well, after reading the comic, I essentially popped in the movie the same day. And the movie is much what I expected it to be. It's a heavily condensed version of the story. If you want to know sort of precisely what was adapted, first, there's 6 issues in each of these volumes. About 4 issues of this one, and about 3.5 issues of this one. There are certain stories that completely bit the dust. For example, there's a couple issues where he's dealing with some goings-on with the Bizarros and their world in the Underverse. There's another story which takes place in Clark Kent's past, where he actually meets up with some of the Supermen of the future, which is quite a nice story, but I can see why they dropped those, because they weren't really integral to the main plot. There was another one that dealt with a miniaturized city that he'd had in his possession for some time, and a solution that he found to help them not be miniaturized anymore, essentially. They kind of touch on some of those things in the movie, but for the most part, the main full stories of them have been excised, and a few of the stories that they do adapt from the graphic novel have been shortened considerably. For example, the first story, which shows him saving the shuttle from the sun and contracting his super cancer, has been shortened considerably. It's essentially like a prologue in the movie. It's a fairly extended prologue, but still, it's not a huge. It's not like a full issue's worth of material as it is in the comic. There's the story of when he is gone from Earth for several months and comes back and finds that there's a couple of new super-powered people in town, the replacement Supermen, basically. There's a man and a woman who apparently are also last survivors, survivors of Krypton, so they have the same superpowers that he does. That story was shortened considerably in the movie. I should also mention, speaking of the miniaturized city story biting the dust, There is a slight nod to that. You do see the miniaturized city, and they do have some mentions of it. But where in the comic he was gone for 2 months because he was dealing with Bizarro World, in the movie he was gone for 2 months because he found a habitable planet where he could take the miniaturized city and put them there to live. So that was a considerable change, but it kind of dealt with both of those things simultaneously without having to get into the whole big story. So, having watched the movie right after reading the comics, it was interesting to see a lot of the changes that had taken place. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a pretty satisfying movie adaptation. I can definitely see why they removed certain storylines, because basically they weren't integral to the main storyline. The primary focus of the movie is to deal with the bigger stories. So, with Superman dying, on all the stuff surrounding that, with all the stuff involving Lex Luthor, obviously, because that's a huge part of the story. All the stuff involving Lois Lane, because that's a huge part of the story. All of those things have obviously been shortened and tightened up a little bit, but for the most part, they're pretty much exactly as they appear in the comics. So, with a few slight alterations, which just make for a slightly more dramatic film, that might not have worked as well on the printed page, but work better in the movie version. Overall, a very faithful and satisfying adaptation, and if you like one, I would recommend the other. So, yeah, so my thoughts on All-Star Superman. I really enjoyed it a lot, actually. I mean, it is a perfect example of how, in the hands of a capable writer, you actually can have an interesting Superman story. I mean, the biggest problem, obviously, with Superman is he's so ridiculously powerful. How does a writer find challenges for him that are plausible? So it's kind of funny, because in this story, Morrison has made him even more powerful than he's ever been before. Well, to my knowledge, anyway. Yet still manages to make an interesting story. So it's not so much that he was hampered by Superman being so overpowered to begin with. He decided to make him even more overpowered, to the point where that was actually his own undoing. His overpoweredness was his doom. Interesting stuff. So definitely worth checking out. If you just like a good superhero story, if you'd like, just a really good standalone Superman story that doesn't require really any major knowledge of the past history of Superman and just stands very nicely on its own, but at the same time you'll see a lot of familiar elements even if you are a casual fan. Yeah, I definitely recommend All-Star Superman. I enjoyed it immensely. I can easily say this is probably the absolute best Superman story I've ever read. Now, granted, I haven't read a lot of them, but I have read some of the notable ones over the years. And, yeah, top marks. Well recommended, Skinslip. Thank you very much for pointing me in the direction of this one, because it's, I mean, just from the title, All-Star Superman, it just sounds so cheesy. I mean, without knowing what it is, I probably would have completely overlooked it. I mean, I likely would have at least picked up the movie at some point just to complete the DC Universe animated movie collection. But I probably would have passed on the comics had you not pointed me in that direction. So thank you very much. And yeah, alrighty. So All-Star Superman, check it out. That is it from me to you for now. So until next time, thanks for watching, and sayonara. Like, for example, the initial story where it shows him rescuing the shuttle and basically contracting his super cancer, excuse me, has been shortened. So that is it from me to you. So that is it from me to you for now. All-Star Superman. Check it out. Alrighty. That's it. Fuck. Just...